The evening began with a warm, golden glow spreading across the enormous mansion as guests arrived one by one, stepping out of shiny cars that lined the driveway. Everyone who walked in seemed to carry an air of importance. Their voices filled the space with loud greetings, gentle laughter, and the kind of confidence that only people used to luxury often showed. Inside the hall, soft music played in the background, and chandeliers sparkled like frozen fireworks hanging from the ceiling. Amid this crowd of wealthy and powerful people, a young waitress moved quietly with a tray in her hands. Her name was Lena, and she had been hired by an event company for the night. She had worked many parties before, but something about this one felt heavier. Maybe it was the number of important guests, or maybe it was the way everyone dressed like they belonged to another world entirely. Still, she kept her head down. Ready to do her job the best she could, Lena walked carefully between groups of guests, offering drinks with a polite smile. She was always careful not to interrupt conversations or draw unnecessary attention. She had learned long ago that blending into the background made her job easier. It also helped her avoid anyone who might look down on her for being a server. In places like this, people sometimes judged not by the kindness in a person's heart, but by the clothes they wore or the job they did. The host of the night was a well-known tycoon whose parties were always large and extravagant. People spoke about him often, how successful he was, how confident he sounded, and how he enjoyed being the center of attention. Tonight was no different. He walked through the hall greeting guests with a wide grin, shaking hands, and tossing small jokes that made his friends laugh loudly. He seemed to enjoy the praise and admiration that followed him everywhere he went. His presence filled the room, and many people automatically stepped aside when he walked past. He liked that. He had built a life where everything seemed to bend around his wishes, and he had no intention of changing that. Lena noticed him several times while moving across the room. Though she never looked long enough to seem rude, she simply did her work quietly. She set down empty glasses, picked up full trays, and made sure she did not bump into anyone. As she moved through the room, she could hear the murmur of conversations, business deals, travel stories, jokes about spending money as if it were nothing. At one point, she passed by a pair of guests who were talking in a slightly annoyed tone. One of them said, "Some of these workers act like they're too good for the job. Look at that girl. She hasn't smiled once." Lena pretended not to hear it, but the words sank somewhere deep inside her. She was polite, she worked hard, and she always tried to do her best. Still, some people assumed things about her just because she wasn't loud or overly cheerful. Her quiet nature often made people think she was unfriendly or distant, when in reality, she simply didn't want to disturb anyone. The tycoon heard the comment too. He looked briefly at the two guests who whispered, and then turned his eyes toward Lena. His gaze followed her for a few seconds. She walked away. Something about the situation seemed to spark his curiosity. He watched as Lena continued working. She did not try to impress anyone. She wasn't laughing loudly like some workers did to earn extra tips or attention. She simply moved from one place to another, offering drinks with calm, steady hands. The more the tycoon watched, the more he misread her quiet nature. Instead of seeing her as hardworking and focused, he assumed she was distant, maybe even cold. His ego didn't like that. To him, every person in his house should be aware of his presence. People usually tried to win his approval, whether through compliments or friendly conversations. Workers usually stood extra straight, smiled extra bright, but Lena didn't even look at him. Not once. He noticed this, and he didn't enjoy it, so he began paying more attention to her. As Lena walked by with a tray of drinks, he stepped slightly into her path, forcing her to pause. "Be careful," he said, though she had not come close to spilling anything. "Yes, sir," she replied softly, giving a small nod before moving away. He watched her go. Something about her calm response made him more curious and a little displeased. He wasn't used to workers being so quiet. He mistook her behavior for lack of respect, though that wasn't true at all. Over the next half hour, the tycoon found ways to approach her again. Each time it was subtle, but Lena sensed he was watching her. He would ask her to bring him a different drink, to adjust something on his table, or to check on a group of guests who already seemed fine. She did everything he asked without complaint, but inside she felt uneasy. She didn't want to make mistakes, especially not in front of such important people. Meanwhile, the mood of the party slowly shifted. The guests had enjoyed the food, talked about their achievements, and taken pictures across the mansion. But now, some of them began to look a little bored. The music in the background was gentle, but predictable. The conversations had become repetitive. People were ready for something new to happen. The Tycoon noticed the change as well. He scanned the room, looking for an opportunity to bring more excitement to the night. That was when his eyes landed on the grand piano near the edge of the hall. It was polished, shining under the lights, and almost begging someone to sit and play it. A small smile formed on his face as an idea crossed his mind. He looked around at the guests, then at the workers, then back at Lena. A thought shaped itself inside his mind, something that he believed would entertain his friends and maybe remind everyone that he had the power to make things happen. He decided that a little fun at someone else's expense might wake up the crowd as Lena walked past him again. He stepped forward and spoke loudly enough for the people around him to hear. "You there?" he said. Gesturing toward her, Lena stopped, holding her tray carefully. "Yes, sir." He nodded toward the piano. "Do you know how to play?" A few nearby guests turned their heads, interested. Lena felt her heartbeat quicken. She hadn't expected anyone to ask her something like that. She shook her head gently. "I haven't played in a long time, sir." "I'm just here to serve," the Tycoon cut her off. "Nonsense. It's just a simple question. Can you play or not?" Her fingers tightened around the tray. The attention made her uncomfortable. She didn't want people staring at her. She didn't want to be part of any performance. "Not here. I used to play a little," she said quietly, hoping the answer would satisfy him. But instead, her answer made his smile grow wider. "Perfect," he said. "We need some entertainment. Why don't you give us a tune?" Lena froze. She looked around, noticing several guests now watching her with curious expressions. Some were smiling politely, while others seemed amused by the unexpected moment. "I really can't, sir. I haven't practiced for years," she tried to explain. The Tycoon waved his hand in the air as if brushing away her words. "It's fine. It's just for fun. Come on, show us something." "Ah!" His voice carried through the hall. More people turned to see what was happening. A few guests chuckled softly, expecting something embarrassing or silly. Lena felt trapped. She didn't want to cause trouble or appear difficult, especially not when she needed the job. But playing in front of such a large crowd felt impossible. She stood still, unsure of what to do, while all eyes slowly turned toward her. In that moment, she wished she could disappear into the floor. She wished she had never walked past him at that moment. She wished she were anywhere else, but the Tycoon kept waiting, his smile growing sharper with every second, and the entire room watched as the pressure around her grew heavier. Making her wonder whether she had any choice at all, Lena stood there for a moment, uncertain whether she had misunderstood what the Tycoon wanted. The piano stood across the room like a spotlight waiting to swallow her whole. She felt her chest tighten as more guests turned to watch, curious to see what the quiet waitress would do next. Their eyes followed her every breath, as if she were suddenly the center of the night's entertainment. And she knew that if she refused, it might be taken the wrong way. Maybe even cost her the little job she had. A soft, trembling sensation spread through her hands. Not because she didn't know how to play the piano, but because she had never liked being watched. Being the focus of a room filled with wealthy strangers felt like standing on thin ice waiting for it to crack. But the waiting felt worse than anything else, so she forced herself to inhale deeply. "I'll try, sir," she finally said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Good," the Tycoon replied with a satisfied grin. It was the kind of smile someone wore when they felt they had won something. Lena gently lowered her tray on a nearby table and wiped her palms on her apron. Her footsteps toward the piano sounded louder than the music. With every step she took, she felt the weight of dozens of eyes following her. The room seemed to stretch longer than before, the distance between her and the piano growing impossibly wide. A small group of guests leaned in closer as she reached the instrument. Some took out their phones, expecting to record something they could laugh about later. Others simply watched with mild amusement, certain they were about to witness an awkward moment. Lena swallowed hard and sat on the piano bench. The polished surface reflected the warm lights from above. She placed her fingers gently on the keys, but didn't press down yet. Instead, she stared at her hands and tried to calm her breathing. It had been years since she played anything. Life had taken her away from music, not because she wanted to leave it, but because she didn't have the luxury to hold on to something that didn't feed her family or pay the bills. She had once loved music more than anything. She remembered afternoons spent practicing while her mother cooked in the kitchen and her younger brother hummed along to the songs she played. Those were quiet days, peaceful days, but life changed. Challenges arrived one after another, and music slowly became a memory tucked away somewhere deep inside her. As she stared at the keys now, she wondered if her fingers even remembered how to play. The fear of making a mistake pressed heavily on her shoulders. The Tycoon stood nearby, leaning against a tall chair, watching her with an entertained expression. "Well," he asked, loud enough for people to hear, "we're waiting?" A few guests chuckled softly. Lena's heart thumped once, then again. She closed her eyes for a second, trying to remind herself that this moment, though painful, would pass. She had survived harder things. She could survive this too. She took a deep breath and gently pressed one of the keys. A soft, lonely note echoed through the hall, carrying a thin thread of emotion. She pressed another, then another. The sound wasn't perfect, but it wasn't wrong either. This small start gave her courage. She let her hands move a little more freely. She began playing simple chords, the ones she remembered from childhood practice. The melody was fragile, like a tiny bird trying to fly in strong wind. But she wasn't playing for the crowd. She wasn't playing for the Tycoon. She played because it was the only thing she could do in that moment to keep herself steady. The guests quieted down as they watched her. Some still smiled, as if expecting her to mess up soon. But Lena didn't think about them anymore. Her eyes softened, and her posture relaxed just enough for her hands to move more comfortably. Slowly, the trembling began to fade. One of the older guests leaned slightly toward another and whispered, "Maybe she actually knows something." The other shrugged. The Tycoon folded his arms, waiting for something embarrassing to happen. He wanted laughter. He wanted the room to come alive with entertainment. It forced her into the spotlight, not because he cared about music, but because he believed she would make a harmless mistake. Something the guests could talk about with amusement. But Lena didn't rush. She continued with a simple melody, and although she intended to stop after a few seconds, something inside her resisted. Her fingers began remembering their old rhythm. Her heart, which had been full of fear, slowly found a steady beat. The music began to blend with memory's quiet evenings. Warm smiles, gentle encouragement from people who were no longer around. She felt something she hadn't felt in years. A small spark, a whisper of joy. The guests noticed the shift. The notes became cleaner, smoother. Her hands moved not with confidence, but with sincerity. And sincerity has a strange power. It draws people in without trying. The laughter died out completely. Conversations faded. Even the Tycoon paused his half-amused expression, sensing that something wasn't going the way he expected. Lena didn't see any of this. She didn't look up. She simply let her fingers follow the faint memories they carried. Then, suddenly, the melody faded as she stopped playing. She pulled her hands away, feeling her heartbeat rise again. She hadn't planned to play that long. She felt embarrassed for letting herself get lost in the moment. The room stayed silent. Her throat tightened. She wondered if she had made a fool of herself. Maybe the sudden silence meant they didn't know how to react. Maybe they were confused or disappointed. Before she could stand from the bench, someone said softly, "Play something more." She turned slightly and saw a guest seated nearby, looking at her with genuine interest. It wasn't mockery or boredom, just curiosity. Others nodded. Some encouraged her gently with small gestures. The Tycoon raised an eyebrow, not quite sure what was happening. This wasn't the reaction he expected. He had planned for amusement, maybe a few harmless jokes. But now, the mood had shifted in an unexpected way. Lena hesitated. She wasn't sure whether she should continue. She wasn't a performer anymore. She didn't want to be the center of the night. But their faces weren't harsh. Their eyes weren't laughing at her. She placed her hands on the keys again, unsure if she could do more. She searched her memory for another melody, something softer, something soft. Then she began again, slow notes spaced evenly, building into a tune that carried a quiet warmth, a melody that belonged to her past. The sound traveled gently across the hall, drifting into corners, touching faces, while softening expressions. This time, no one moved. People put down their glasses. Conversations stopped. Someone even lowered their phone, completely engrossed. And the Tycoon, who usually filled every silence with his voice or presence, found himself strangely quiet. He leaned forward slightly, listening with an expression that no longer matched the confidence he had displayed all evening. Lena kept playing, letting her hands guide the way. She didn't try to impress anyone. She simply played from a place that had been silent for too long. When the last note faded from the piano, the room stayed still. For a moment it felt like everyone held the same breath. Then, quietly at first, a few guests began clapping. It grew louder as more people joined in. Lena blinked in surprise, unsure how to react. She had never imagined applause tonight, not in this place. The Tycoon watched as people looked impressed instead of amused. Something inside him tightened. His plan hadn't gone the way he wanted. And now the attention was shifting in a way he hadn't expected. Lena stood up from the bench with shaky hands. She wasn't used to this kind of attention. She wasn't used to feeling seen in this way. And yet, something inside her felt strangely lighter, as if she had reclaimed a small part of herself that she thought she had lost forever. Lena stood next to the piano, her heart still racing even though the applause had faded. She wasn't used to so many eyes on her, and she felt exposed, as if someone had opened a door she had kept closed for years. She tried to step away quietly, hoping the moment was over, but the room didn't return to normal as she expected. Instead, the guests kept looking at her, some whispering softly, others exchanging surprised glances. The Tycoon, who had been leaning against a chair with his usual air of confidence, straightened up. His amused smile was gone. Something about the way the guests reacted didn't sit well with him. This wasn't the scene he had imagined. He wanted laughter, something light that would entertain his wealthy friends and remind everyone that he was the center of attention. But now the attention had shifted from him to a young waitress who wasn't supposed to matter. He clapped his hands twice, loudly trying to pull the room's mood back under his control. "All right, that was cute," he said with a laugh that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Now let's get on with the party." But the guests didn't move away as quickly as he expected. One of them, a middle-aged woman wearing a long silver dress, stepped closer to the piano. "Excuse me," she said softly to Lena, "did you learn music somewhere?" That was quite remarkable for someone who hasn't played in years. Lena didn't know how to answer. She didn't want to sound proud or make a big deal out of anything. She simply lowered her gaze and said, "I learned a little when I was younger, not professionally." The woman nodded, her eyes kind. "Well, you have a gift." Lena thanked her quietly. She wanted to step away, but other guests gathered near the piano, curious and impressed. A few even asked if she could play another piece. She felt her stomach tighten again. She wasn't here to perform. She was here to work. She didn't want to cause trouble for the event company that hired her. "I really should get back to serving," she murmured. Before anyone else could respond, the Tycoon took a few steps toward her. His expression had stiffened, though he tried to hide it behind a half-smile. "Yes," he said, placing emphasis on the word in a way that carried more meaning than necessary. She should get back to work. The guests need service, not a concert. His statement made the room quiet again, not silent like before, but awkwardly still. Some guests exchanged glances, sensing something off in his tone. Others stepped back politely, not wanting to cause conflict. Lena nodded immediately, though she felt a small twist of embarrassment. "Of course, sir." Her voice was low, polite. She stepped away from the piano and returned to her tray, picking it up with care. But even as she tried to move on, she could feel the weight of the room. Some guests looked at her with admiration, others with confusion, and a few with genuine interest in her story. The Tycoon, however, watched her with an expression she couldn't fully understand, something between irritation and disbelief. She walked toward the dining area to continue her work. Each step felt heavy. She thought the night would go back. Too normal. The people would forget what happened and everything would fade like a brief spark. But it didn't. Everywhere she walked, someone seemed to still be watching her. A pair of guests smiled warmly as she passed. One of them whispered, "She plays so well," not knowing Lena could hear. Another complimented her quietly when she offered drinks. The sudden attention made her uneasy. She wasn't used to being noticed, especially not by people who lived in a world so far from her own. Meanwhile, the Tycoon remained near the piano, but his mind wasn't at ease. He replayed the scene again and again, how the crowd had gone silent, how the applause had grown, how the energy of the night had shifted because of one ordinary waitress. He didn't like losing control. He didn't like being overshadowed, even briefly. And he especially didn't like the idea that someone he had intended to embarrass had somehow impressed everyone instead. He watched Lena as she moved through the room. Her head was slightly lowered, her steps careful, her expression calm. She didn't try to boast or draw attention to herself. She acted as if nothing had happened. And maybe that's what bothered him the most. She didn't seem affected by him. "Unbelievable," he muttered under his breath. One of his close friends approached him. "I didn't expect that," the friend said with a small laugh. "She's actually talented." The Tycoon forced a smile. Lucky moment. Anyone can play a simple tune if they practiced when they were young. But his friend wasn't convinced. That wasn't simple. She played from the heart. You could see it. The Tycoon didn't respond. His jaw tightened for a moment before he waved his friend off and returned to greeting guests. But every now and then, his eyes wandered back to Lena. Lena tried her best to stay focused. She picked up empty glasses, filled new trays, and made sure not to bump into anyone. But her mind kept drifting back to the piano. Part of her still felt the softness of the keys under her fingertips. Part of her felt alive in a way she hadn't felt in years. Music used to be a dream she held close. A quiet, beautiful dream. She often imagined herself performing on small stages or teaching children to play. But life took her in another direction when responsibilities grew heavier than her hopes. She remembered being a teenager, sitting near her window with her small keyboard, playing for hours, even when her fingers hurt. She remembered her mother pausing from her chores to listen. She remembered her younger brother sitting beside her, swinging his legs as he hummed the melody. Those memories felt warm like sunlight on cold skin. But when times got hard, she had to step away from all of it. She found herself working multiple small jobs, helping her family survive. The piano became something she passed by in photographs. It's not something she touched. Tonight, for just a moment, she felt that old warmth again. A small piece of herself she thought she had lost, as she carried a tray of drinks across the hall. A man approached her, a guest she hadn't spoken to earlier. He had gentle eyes and a kind voice. "Excuse me," he said softly. "I hope I'm not bothering you, but I wanted to ask, did you compose the second melody you played?" Lena blinked, caught off guard. "No, sir. It's just an old piece I learned when I was younger. It was beautiful," he said sincerely. "You played with emotion. That's rare." She smiled awkwardly, unsure how to respond. "Thank you. I didn't expect anyone to notice." "Oh, people noticed," he said with a small laugh. "You changed the room for a moment." Lena thanked him again before moving away quietly. She didn't want to draw too much attention. She didn't want anyone, including the Tycoon, to think she was trying to be part of the event more than necessary, but her gentle humility only made the guests admire her more. Meanwhile, the Tycoon had been watching that interaction from across the room. A flicker of irritation crossed his eyes. He didn't understand why people were fascinated by her. She was just a worker. Someone hired for a few hours? Someone who should remain invisible. He felt something he hadn't felt in years. A strange mix of annoyance, insecurity, and confusion. He walked toward the center of the room, pretending to be casual, but his thoughts were restless. He wanted to regain control of the party's mood. He wanted to be the one people admired. He wanted the attention back. When he passed by the piano again, he glanced at it and frowned. It bothered him that an instrument he barely used had suddenly become the highlight of the evening. Lena, aware of his growing frustration, continued working with gentle grace. She moved through the room quietly, her eyes soft, her steps steady. She didn't notice the way people still watched her with quiet appreciation, and she didn't see how the Tycoon's expression hardened every time someone whispered about her. Musical talent. What she also didn't know was that the night was far from over. The piano had opened a door she didn't expect, and the guests' admiration had sparked something deeper in the Tycoon, something that would shape what happened next, something that would change the tone of the entire evening. The morning after the party felt strangely quieter for her, as if the world was still settling itself after the night's unexpected turn. She woke up early, the same way she always did, but something inside her felt different. There was an odd mix of relief, confusion, and a small spark of pride she tried not to acknowledge too much. She reminded herself that life went on, even when something unbelievable happened. She got ready for work slowly. Usually she rushed, barely having the time to tie her apron before the first customers arrived. But today she moved at a calmer pace. She kept replaying the moment she sat at the piano. The silence in the room, the eyes on her, the sound of the first note rising into the air, it all felt unreal. But more than that, she remembered the people who came to her afterward, people who usually ignored her when she served tables. They had spoken to her with kindness, with respect, almost with admiration. It was something she wasn't used to. She had spent years working quietly, knowing that most people barely noticed her presence. Yet last night, all of them had been watching her, listening to her. Still, she reminded herself not to expect anything from it. Life had taught her that surprises didn't always last. They were like sudden gusts of wind, strong for a moment, then gone. When she reached the restaurant, her coworkers greeted her with wide eyes and excited whispers. They had heard stories already. Some were exaggerated, some were incomplete, and some were unbelievably dramatic. As if she had performed on a grand stage in front of thousands, her manager called her over, which made her nervous at first. She expected a lecture or a reminder to stay in her place. But instead, he looked at her with a mix of pride and shock. "I didn't know you could do that," he said in a low voice, almost as if he still wasn't sure it had really happened. She didn't know what to say. She simply told him she had learned when she was younger, and she had not played much ever since. He nodded slowly, then told her she could start her shift as usual. But as she walked away, she heard him tell another worker, "I can't believe she played like that," at his party of all places. His party, the memory of the Tycoon, made her uncomfortable. She still didn't fully understand his reason for putting her on the spot. He had seemed amused, almost playful. But there was something sharper behind it, something that made her feel small, at least at the beginning. She wondered if he regretted it now after seeing how things turned out. But she didn't want to think about him too much. She didn't want to give him space in her mind. The morning rush came, and she worked the way she always did, steady, polite, quick on her feet. But even as she carried trays or refilled cups, people kept giving her looks. Some customers who had never spoken to her beyond ordering their meals now asked questions like, "Are you really the one who played last night?" She answered with small nods and quiet smiles, not wanting attention, but also not wanting to appear rude. At lunchtime, her coworker told her someone outside was asking for her. Her first reaction was confusion. No one ever came looking for her. She stepped out of the restaurant cautiously, wiping her hands on her apron. A woman she recognized from the party was waiting there. She was well-dressed, elegant, and holding a small envelope in her hand. When she saw her, she smiled warmly. "I hope you don't mind me coming here," the woman said. "I just wanted to thank you again. Your playing last night was beautiful." The compliment made her cheeks warm. She bowed her head slightly and murmured a thank you. The woman held out the envelope. "This isn't much, but I felt you deserved something for sharing your talent." She hesitated. She didn't like taking things from strangers, especially money. But the woman gently insisted, her expression sincere. "Please," she said. "It's not charity. It's appreciation." After a moment, she accepted the envelope with quiet gratitude. But the surprises didn't end there. Later in the afternoon, another guest from the party visited the restaurant. Then another. Some simply wanted to say thank you. Some wanted to hear if she played anywhere else, and some even asked if she taught lessons. She found the idea almost funny. She barely had time for herself, let alone teaching anyone, but the attention was overwhelming. She began to worry it would cause trouble. She didn't want her manager to think she was bringing chaos into the restaurant, and yet, despite the stress, there was a small feeling growing inside her, something she had buried years ago. It was the feeling of being seen, truly seen. As the day went on, one question kept echoing in her mind. What did the Tycoon think after everything that happened last night? She didn't know why she wondered. Maybe because he was the one who started it. Maybe because she still remembered the smug smile he had when he first called her out. Maybe because she wondered if he felt embarrassed now. She tried to push the thought away, but it stayed with her. The evening shift was quieter, giving her time to breathe. She took a moment to sit in the break area, sipping water. Her hands were a little shaky from exhaustion and the emotional weight of the day. She closed her eyes for a moment, trying to settle her thoughts. Then her coworker rushed in. "There's someone asking for you again," he said. She sighed softly, expecting another party guest. But when she stepped into the main room, she froze. There he was, the Tycoon. He stood near the entrance, dressed in the same expensive style as always. His presence seemed to shift the room, drawing every eye toward him, even when no one dared to approach. He noticed her and gave a small, unreadable smile. For a moment, neither of them spoke. She wasn't sure what he wanted. An apology? A conversation? Something else entirely? He stepped closer, his voice calm and almost carefully measured. "Do you have a moment?" he asked. She didn't answer right away. She didn't trust him, not fully. But she also didn't want to cause a scene in front of customers. So she nodded and followed him outside. The air was cool, and the noise from the street filled the silence between them. "I wanted to talk to you about last night," he said finally. Those words made her tense. She couldn't tell if this was going to be good or bad, he continued. "I didn't expect things to turn out the way they did." She kept her face neutral. She didn't want him to see how nervous she was. "Your performance." He paused, searching for the right words. "It was extraordinary. I've never seen a room change so quickly because of one person." She didn't know what to say. Compliments from strangers were one thing, but hearing them from the man who had forced her into that situation was something else. It felt complicated. He seemed to sense her unease. "I understand if you're upset with me," he said. "I shouldn't have put you in that position." That surprised her. She hadn't expected him to admit that, but he added softly, "I'm glad you played. Not because it helped my party, but because you deserved to be heard." Those words hit her harder than she expected. He looked at her with a sincerity she didn't know he was capable of. Then he handed her a card. "If you ever want to play somewhere else, somewhere people might appreciate you more, call this number." She stared at the card. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't some grand promise. It was simple, almost quiet, just like her. He gave her a small nod and walked away, leaving her standing outside the restaurant with the card in her hand and a feeling she couldn't quite understand that night. When she finally returned home, she sat at her small table, placed the card in front of her, stared at it for a long time. She didn't know what would happen next, but for the first time in a long time, the future didn't feel as small as it used to. The days that followed felt like a slow, gentle storm around her, nothing destructive, but enough to stir everything she thought she understood about her life. She kept the small card the Tycoon had given her tucked inside a drawer at home, hidden under a folded scarf. She didn't know why she hid it. Maybe because she was scared of what it meant, or maybe because she was scared of the hope it carried. She continued going to work, moving through her routine with the careful steadiness she had always lived by, but something inside her had changed. She felt it every time someone mentioned her playing. She felt it when customers looked at her with a new kind of respect. and she felt it late at night when she sat on her small bed. Thinking about the moment the room fell silent after the last note she played, she wasn't used to being seen. Now, she wasn't even sure if she was ready for it. One evening, after a long shift, she returned home feeling more tired than usual. The restaurant had been busy, and her feet were sore from walking back and forth. She made a small dinner and sat by the window while she ate. Her neighborhood wasn't the quietest, and she could hear kids playing outside and the faint sound of someone's television from a nearby apartment. She didn't mind the noise. In a way, it reminded her she wasn't alone. After eating, she took out the scarf and slipped the card from underneath. She held it for a long time, tracing the simple print on the front. She wondered what would happen if she called the number. Would he even remember her? Would it lead to something good, or would it only complicate her life? She wasn't ready to make a decision yet. The next morning, her coworker greeted her with an excited expression. "You're everywhere," they said. She blinked. "What do you mean?" Her coworker pulled out their phone and showed her a short video online. Someone from the party had posted a recording of her playing the piano. The video was slightly shaky, the angle not perfect, but her hands on the keys were clear, and the music sounded warm and full. It already had thousands of views. She felt her stomach drop. Her coworker grinned. "You're famous now." She didn't feel famous. She felt overwhelmed. Throughout the day, more people mentioned the video. Some had seen it online. Some had heard about it from someone else. A few customers even asked her if she planned to upload more music. She laughed softly each time, trying to explain she didn't have any place to record or any piano to use regularly. People reacted with surprise. They assumed someone who played that well must have access to good instruments, but she didn't. She barely had enough space in her small apartment for a table. Still, all the attention didn't feel bad. It felt strange, but not unpleasant. It was like someone had opened a window she didn't know existed. Late in the afternoon, as she wiped down a table, the manager approached her. "There's someone waiting for you," he said. Her heart sank. She hoped it wasn't another person with a camera or someone asking for a performance. But when she stepped outside, she saw a man from a local community center standing there. He held a friendly expression and explained he had seen the video online. "We have a small music room," he said. "We offer lessons and practice space. It's not fancy, but it's warm and quiet. If you ever want a place to play, we'd be happy to let you use it. No charge." She stared at him in disbelief. "Are you sure?" He nodded. "Someone with your talent should have a place to practice." She thanked him quietly, overwhelmed by the kindness. He handed her a small flyer with the center's hours and address and wished her a good day. For the rest of her shift, she kept thinking about the offer. A place to practice. A piano she could touch whenever she wanted. It felt like a forgotten dream suddenly returning. She finished work and walked to the community center after her shift ended. It wasn't far, just a 20-minute walk through familiar streets. When she stepped inside, she was greeted by the warm smile of a receptionist who already seemed to know who she was. "You're welcome to look around," he said. She entered the small music room. There wasn't much inside, just a simple upright piano, a chair, and a window that let in the late evening light. But when she ran her fingers across the surface of the piano, it felt like touching something precious. She sat down and pressed a single key. The note rang out softly, filling the room with a gentle hum. She closed her eyes and began to play. It wasn't a full piece at first. She simply let her fingers wander, letting her hands remember the shape of the chords, the feeling of shifting tones. It had been so long since she played without an audience. Playing freely felt like breathing. After a few minutes, she began to play a song she remembered from her childhood. It wasn't complicated, but it held memories. She felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, not from sadness, but from something deeper, something like relief. She didn't know how much time passed. When she finally stopped, she realized she wasn't alone. The Tycoon stood in the doorway. She jolted in surprise, nearly knocking the piano bench. He raised his hands a little, as if to show he meant no harm. "I'm sorry. I didn't want to interrupt." She took a breath to steady herself. "What are you doing here?" He stepped inside slowly. "I was nearby." Someone at the center mentioned you might come today. She wasn't sure how she felt about that. Part of her was nervous. Another part was curious. He approached with a softer expression than she had seen before. You sound even better when you're not under pressure, he said. She looked away. Unsure how to respond, he continued, I'm not here to bother you. I just wanted to check on you and to say thank you again for what you did that night. She frowned slightly. Why does it matter so much to you? He paused. When you played, he said quietly, it reminded me of something I forgot. Something important. She waited, but he didn't explain further. You have a gift, he added, and you deserve the chance to grow it. She didn't know what to say. She wasn't used to people speaking to her like this, like her dreams mattered. He glanced at the piano. Would you play something else? Only if you want to. She hesitated, then nodded. She turned back to the piano and began to play a soft, flowing melody. This time, she wasn't nervous. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She was simply sharing something honest. When she finished, she turned to him. His expression was thoughtful. He looked almost humbled. You're remarkable, he said. She didn't feel remarkable. But hearing it made something inside her warm. He took a step back, giving her space. I won't disturb you anymore, but I hope you keep playing. As he left, she watched him go with a mix of confusion and something else she couldn't name. She stayed in the music room for a while longer, letting her thoughts settle. The night air outside was cool when she finally stepped out. For the first time in a long time, the world around her felt wide open, and she wasn't afraid of it. She woke up earlier than usual that morning, long before the sun had fully risen. The quiet inside her small apartment felt different, lighter, almost expectant. For weeks her days had carried a mix of uncertainty and wonder, but now something inside her felt steady, as if her life had finally found a rhythm she hadn't realized she was searching for. The community center had become a second home to her. Every evening after work, she walked there, slipped into the small music room, and played until the world outside faded. Some nights people gathered to listen, not because she asked them to, but because her music seemed to draw them naturally. Other nights, she played alone, letting her thoughts settle through each note. But today felt like more than a routine. Something inside her whispered that this day would change things. She got ready for work with calm movements, tying her hair back and smoothing the front of her uniform. As she stepped outside, the morning air was cool and fresh, like it was greeting her with a quiet promise. When she arrived at the restaurant, her coworkers greeted her with their usual smiles, but one of them held a small envelope. This came for you, they said. She frowned in confusion. No one ever sent her anything. She opened the envelope gently. Inside was a simple letter from the community center. They were hosting a small event that evening, nothing grand, just a friendly gathering where local artists could share their talents. They wanted her to play. Her heart tightened. She had never been asked to perform by choice. The last time she played for a room full of people had been at the party, unexpected, unplanned, and full of pressure. But this invitation felt different. It wasn't forced. It wasn't meant to embarrass her. It was a genuine gesture. She didn't respond right away. She needed time to think. Throughout her work shift, she replayed the invitation in her mind. She thought of the warm music room, the people who had encouraged her, and the feeling she had each time her fingers touched the keys. She also thought of the Tycoon and how he had looked at her in the community center that night as if her music had shown him something he had forgotten in himself. By lunchtime, she knew her answer. When her shift ended later that afternoon, she walked straight to the community center with the letter in hand. The receptionist looked up with a bright smile. So, will you join us tonight? They asked. She nodded softly. Yes, I'll play. They clapped their hands in excitement. Everyone will be so happy. She wasn't sure if she felt brave or terrified, but she knew she was ready. The event was set to start in just a few hours, so she stayed at the center, practicing in the music room to calm her nerves. The little upright piano felt familiar now, like an old friend who understood every emotion she carried. As she played, she didn't focus on perfection. She focused on honesty, letting the music reflect her journey, her fears, her quiet strength. and the hope she had slowly learned to trust. When evening arrived, the community center filled with people, locals, families, students, and a few curious faces she didn't recognize. The room buzzed softly with friendly energy. It wasn't a fancy event. There were no chandeliers or luxury decorations. Just warm lights, simple chairs, and people who genuinely cared. She waited backstage, her heart beating fast. A volunteer guided her to the side of the small stage. "Whenever you're ready," it whispered. She took a deep breath and stepped out. The room quieted. For a moment, she froze. The faces blurred together. She felt the familiar fear rising in her chest. Then she saw him. The Tycoon sat near the middle, not in a reserved seat. Not surrounded by people, but simply there, almost blending in with everyone else. He wasn't dressed in the sharp style he wore at his parties. He looked more relaxed, as if he had deliberately tried to match the atmosphere of the room. When their eyes met, he gave her a small, steady nod, a silent message. "You can do this." Something inside her eased. She sat at the piano, her hands hovered above the keys. The room held a soft, expectant stillness. Then she began to play. The first notes were gentle, like a quiet sunrise. The melody flowed easily, shaped by the emotions she had carried for so long: uncertainty, resilience, hope. Her fingers moved with confidence she hadn't known she possessed. Every note felt like a piece of her story. People listened without whispering. Even children sat quietly, drawn in by the warmth of her music. As she continued, she felt a shift inside her. This wasn't about proving herself. It wasn't about pleasing anyone. It wasn't about fear. This was her voice, one she had hidden for years without realizing its worth. Toward the end of the piece, her eyes lifted briefly. The Tycoon watched her with a soft look, one without pride or arrogance, but with genuine admiration. And for the first time, she didn't feel small in front of him. She felt equal. The final note lingered in the air. For a heartbeat, the room stayed silent. Then applause filled the space. Not loud, forced applause, but warm, grateful applause that wrapped around her like a gentle embrace. People stood. Some cheered softly. Others simply clapped with full hearts. She stood slowly and bowed her head in gratitude. Her hands trembled, not with fear, but with overwhelming emotion. After the event, people gathered around her. They thanked her, asked about her music, and told her how moved they felt. She spoke with a quiet smile, grateful but still shy. Then the crowd thinned, and the Tycoon approached. "Your music was beautiful," he said. She nodded. "Thank you for coming." He hesitated, then added, "I didn't want to miss it. You have something rare, something honest." She looked down, unsure how to respond. After a moment, he asked, "Have you thought about what you want to do next?" She shook her head. "I don't know. Everything feels new." He smiled gently. "Then let it be new. Not rushed, not forced, just yours." There was sincerity in his words, and it warmed her. He took a small step back, giving her space. "If you ever need help, guidance, opportunities, or even just a better piano, you can call me. But only if it's your choice." She appreciated that. He wasn't pushing. He wasn't trying to control her path. He was simply offering support as he turned to leave. She said softly, "I'll think about it." He nodded, understanding the weight of her words. When she left the community center, the night air felt calm and welcoming. She walked slowly, letting the quiet settle around her. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel like she was walking toward uncertainty. She felt like she was walking toward possibility at home. She placed the letter from the community center and the Tycoon's card side by side on her small table, not hidden. Not tucked away, but right where she could see them. Her journey wasn't finished, but she finally understood something important. Her music wasn't just a talent, it was her path, and she was ready to follow it step by step, note by note, without fear.